Thank you so much. I'm starting to feel like this is my second home, so if you ever stop inviting me to come back from time to time, I just want you to know that my feelings would be damaged. I also just thought we showed that beautiful song by Michael Gott last Sunday at Unity of Dallas. Howard Caesar was our guest speaker, and for 34 years he was the minister at Unity of Houston. And he trained and coached Michael Gott to be his replacement. So he said about 6 months after Michael had taken over, Howard Caesar, and his wife took the opportunity to go to Unity conferences in California. And he said, I didn't get to do that a lot because that's a very large church and I didn't have time. But he said, so we went to this conference and we were sitting there with a table of people that I didn't know, and the man next to me said, and what is your history with Unity? And he said, well, Unity of Houston. And he said, this guy said, oh, Michael Gott's church. He said, he's been there 4 months. I was there 34 years. So if you ever stop inviting me back from time to time, I may participate in that. Okay. If you stop and think about it, probably the most familiar greeting there is, hey, what's up? And equally as familiar is our response, not much. So here's the deal, that's not true of most of us. So what would happen if you chose to live your life in a way where there was a variety of other responses besides not much? What happens in life to give you some reminders that perhaps you need to step up? There were two things that happened in my life. The first occurred when I was 16 years old, growing up in Waco, Texas. And by the age of 16, I had been taking tap dance lessons for 12 years, and I was quite passionate about it. And my father, who had a 9th grade education, said to me when I was 16, so what is it you think you want to do with your life? And I said to him in all seriousness, I'm fairly certain I'm going to be a tap dancer on Broadway. Now, unlike many fathers could have said, and perhaps should have said, are you crazy? What are you thinking? You'll starve to death, you'll be a waitress. But he didn't say any of that. What he said was, if you want to be a tap dancer on Broadway, you'll be the best one they ever had. Now, he allowed me to come to my own conclusions in the next couple of years that perhaps Broadway and tap dancing were not my destiny. But it planted that seed because just think about it. If you can succeed as a tap dancer on Broadway, you should be able to do almost anything that you set your mind to. The other prompt that I had occurred in 1963, shortly after I graduated from Baylor. I was hired to work in the Washington, D.C. office of Senator Ralph Yarborough from Texas. And on August the 28th, 1963, Senator Yarborough called the staff in and he said, I'm closing the office for the day, and I can't force you to do this, but my request is that you go down to the Lincoln Memorial and hear this speaker. And so it was that I was there when Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. So my father told me I could be a tap dancer on Broadway, and Martin Luther King told me to dream big, so I better play big or go home, right? So a number of years ago, I had completed a number of different successful careers. I'd started a couple of consulting practices. I worked in a government job. I had a corporate leadership job, but I felt like there was now something new and next that I needed to do. And there were two other people who were good friends at the time. One was the first and early publisher of a newspaper here in Dallas called the Dallas Observer, when it was almost kind of an alternate newspaper. And the other was somebody who was completing a career with the National Leadership Development Company. But all three of us were wanting to transition, so we got together and did some brainstorming. And the brainstorming felt very different. We would go deep, and so it wasn't long before I said, you know, I know somebody else that would benefit from this type of dialogue. And one of them would say, I do too. And so it was, in a matter of time, that there were probably 8 or 10 people who would meet from time to time, and we would go very deep in terms of supporting each other to whatever it was we were up to. The group decided we needed to meet on a regular basis, and I said, well, if we're going to meet on a regular basis and I'm going to send out an email reminder, we have a name. So we looked at our just differences, and I said about the only thing that all of us have in common is that we're up to something. And so it was in 2002 that the Up to Something group in Dallas was born. Now we can show that first. Oh, he's got it. Okay. So your initial look at that picture would have you conclude that we probably don't have a whole lot in common. We were black and white. We were male and female. We were older and younger. We are gay and straight. We are new thought and conservative. We go all over the place with our religions and our beliefs, and yet this group came together and supported one another in ways that we could not have imagined. And I'm happy to say that 18 years later, we still meet on the third Friday of each month from 9 to noon, usually in somebody's home. We do not have an agenda. We do not have flip charts or slides. We really do a check-in thing where people get to talk about what it is they're up to. We have only 2 guidelines. One, of course, is candor and confidentiality. And the other is that judgment is suspended. In other words, if someone had an idea that sounds kind of wild or cockamamie to me, it would never occur to me to say, well, that won't work, or who are you to pull that off? We merely hold the space for people to play very big. And so it was that the Up to Something group was born. Now, this was almost 18 years ago, and I'm delighted to tell you that that group is still going strong today. We have, oh, and the other thing, in our diversity, it doesn't show up here, but eventually we added 2 members, one from Johannesburg, South Africa, and the other from Canada, so I can also say that we're international. So, what does it mean to be up to something in your life? Well, I want to share with you some comments from some of these people, and what you'll notice as I tell these stories, they will resonate very closely with Unity's 5 principles. So the first person I want to introduce you to is Rand Stagen. Now, he's in the front row, the one in the middle there. And Rand said, and I quote, "I joined Up to Something at the beginning of a major career change. I was moving from publishing to leadership development. Although I was filled with energy and optimism, I lacked concrete experience and therefore context. Our Up to Something group was able to share their collective experience and, more importantly, their collective support and encouragement. I can vividly remember being in awe of the cumulative wisdom of this group and how my confidence in myself grew with each monthly meeting. We made each other stronger because we had no preset agenda. We were willing to courageously challenge one another in ways that business associates and families and friends often would not." So what came out of that? A number of years ago, Rand Stagen created and founded the Stagen Leadership Academy. It is a year-long program for corporate executives who are willing to go deep and learn who they are, as well as improving what it is they do. He also made a commitment that Stagen Leadership Group would be run consistent with the principles of conscious capitalism. Now, conscious capitalism is that movement that was started by Mr. Mackey, who was the founder and now retired CEO of Whole Foods. And while John Mackey was the first chairman of the board of Conscious Capitalism, the second chairman of the board of Conscious Capitalism was Rand Stagen. Another person I would like to tell you about is sitting on he's the first gentleman on the left on the second row, and his name is Jerry McGarr. Jerry McGarr said, "Up to Something reminds me of who I am and the unconditional support provided in helping me make my decision to leave the predictability and security of my HR job at SMU and to go full-time on my own. At a series of Up to Something meetings, Jerry agonized over whether he could pull this off and was willing to waller on all of the reasons why he would probably fail. The group refused to validate those reasons, and when he hung up his shingle as a solo entrepreneur, the clients lined up globally and took advantage of his skills. One of the people who took advantage of his skills is former First Lady Laura Bush. Some of you may know that she runs a 2-year program for women in underdeveloped countries to encourage them to pursue their dreams, etc. And she brought Jerry on as one of the facilitators for that group. The other thing that I don't always say when I'm giving this talk, but I will certainly say it to this group, Jerry, who is gay, is also one of the leaders that the Boy Scouts of America have turned to help them understand their new vision. Now, there's another person in there that probably looks familiar to some of you. She's sitting on the first row on the right. Her name is Ellen Davenport, and many of us know her. She was our senior minister at Unity of Dallas for many, many years. And here's what Ellen said about her participation in Up to Something. I learned how to handle business, how to handle people, and how to better understand myself. I was also encouraged to be absolutely authentic, and I practiced on the group. We shared a deep trust that made it okay to be whoever we were, wherever we were on our path. And yes, Ellen Davenport was a member of the Up to Something group when she made the decision to leave her role as the senior minister at Unity of Dallas, so among other things she could write that extraordinary book about Unity's 5 principles. And we also, or you may also know that Ellen is currently the Senior Vice President for Communications for Unity Worldwide. So there's a lot of examples of people who either said, let's go big or go home. The last one I want to share, we've talked to you about in this photo, is the woman on the right in the middle row. Her name is Marcia Clark. Marcia grew up in Galena Park, Texas, and as was predictable for women of her generation and mine, she signed on with what used to be the large EDS corporation here as a secretary and a clerk with her high school degree. She left that role 25 years later. EDS had paid for her to get her college degree and her master's degree, and she was the first woman at EDS invited to join the C-suite. When she took early retirement, she said, I'm not done yet. I'm not going to play on a golf course, although she lives on a golf course. So she started probably 17 years ago, maybe 18 years ago. She runs a year-long program for women called The Power of Self, and women from corporations all over this country, and now Power of Self exists in several other countries as well. And this year will be her last and final 18th year of offering this Power of Self class to women. So that's the stories I want to tell you about this group that's right here. But here's what else has happened. Over the years, some of these people have become alumni, and we'll replace somebody from time to time, but we stay pretty steady at a group of about 8 or 10 or 12. So this next person I want to tell you about, I'm not going to share the name until the end, but this is her story. I was almost done with my first book by May of 2013. When it was time for me to share one Friday at our Up to Something meeting, I talked about the fact that my book was almost done. And I made excuses why it was not finished after 10 years of trying to get it done. Another of our Up to Something members quietly asked me when it would be complete and published. I babbled some answers citing a number of excuses why it was not done and was extremely non-committal. And he just smiled. On my drive home, I thought about how pathetic that response was and vowed to never make excuses like that again when asked the same question. I vowed to myself to have the book done before our next Up to Something meeting, which was 4 weeks away, and in June of 2013, I did exactly that. I came to the next meeting and announced that my book was done and it was published 1 year later. So now if you will put up the second slide, Quentin. The person in that one is the second one from the left. You probably know her as Kim Andrews. But this was Kim's story, and she wrote that gorgeous book called The Global Red Circle about women in different circumstances around the planet. And if she hasn't told you about that and done a talk on it, shame on you. But now you have no responsibility. I have just outed her, so she now has no choice but to do that. Okay. So, what do we want to do with all of this? Well, I want to share what one person did. She's standing all the way on the right. Her name is Sandy Gluckman in the black. And she is our member who was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa. And she was a corporate teacher both during and after apartheid. And when it became clear that apartheid was ending and that Nelson Mandela would be released, she worked with corporate leaders to structure what now had to be a very different message to their employees. So she said the first time they delivered the message, it was basically, things are going to change, they're going to be different now. And she said, and it fell on deaf and very suspicious ears. She said when she was driving home from one of these meetings, she began to notice that almost on every intersection, the black South African people were dancing and singing. They were drumming and playing these beautiful instruments. And she said, that's the way we need to communicate with them. And even though it was a hard sell, she introduced corporations in Johannesburg to the idea of incorporating music and drumming in their culture so that everyone would feel welcome and accounted for. And what I will tell you about Sandy Gluckman now is she was asked about a year ago, she is a PhD child psychologist, and she's chosen to focus on working with parents and teachers who are willing to raise kids label-free. And here's what I mean by that. She doesn't want a parent to be put in the position of saying, this is my daughter, and she has autism. This is my son, and he's ADHD. So she works with them on how to raise label-free children. And about a year ago, she bumped into somebody at a conference who suggested that she do 30 hours of recorded video about the way she practices and teaches this lesson. And they said they wanted that video to go global to parents around the world. That video was launched about 2 months ago, and the response, of course, to nobody's surprise, has been absolutely overwhelming. So, what do I want to say about myself and the Up to Something group? I'm one of these people that's probably had 25 different careers, and I've always loved one more than the other. But after 17 years of working either as an employee or a consultant with Stephen Covey's organization, I got to the point where spending that much time on an airplane was just extremely overrated. And so I said, once more, I'm going to go about and reinvent myself. After all, I know what it is to be up to something. So I sometimes said mistakenly, although I know it wasn't, I started saying to God that prayer or mantra that Ellen Davenport taught some of us, which was, lead me where you need me and speak to me in ways I cannot possibly misunderstand. Please be careful when you say that, because God will speak to you in ways that you cannot possibly misunderstand. And as many of you in this group know, I was in the process of doing that when my husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I elected to be his full-time caregiver. And I basically said to God, surely you jest. Look at my resume, my bio. There is nothing in there about being a caregiver. Why me? Why this? Why now? And God said, why not? And so those of you who are here in the past know that the 5 years of taking care of Tom with Alzheimer's was an extraordinary growth and learning experience that I will never ever forget. And I will also share with this group that Kim, even though Tom was sort of out of it and medicated for the last 2 or 3 days, he resonated to the old hymns from the Baptist church that we grew up with. So your sweet minister, Kim, would come over and stand by Tom's hospital bed in our room and sing him all of those old hymns. So I don't know what's next for me now. I'm almost afraid to say, lead me where you need me and speak to me in ways I cannot possibly misunderstand. But I will, I'm happy to share with you that it feels like one of my next callings is to do at other Unity churches exactly what I'm doing here. I think the Up to Something group and my experiences all relate so well to the Unity principles and the teachings, and so that's what it is that I think I'll probably be doing for a while. Stay tuned. So, in closing, I want to share with you a saying that I have been resonating with, and that is not just this Up to Something group, but here's my challenge for you. The next time somebody comes up to you and says, "What's up?" I'm going to challenge you to give a response other than "not much." Now, you don't have to launch into a lecture. They'll start to roll their eyes and walk away from you and wonder why they asked you the question. But do that and consider an answer that's something other than, "oh, not much." Or to close and put this in the words of Dr. Stephen Covey, when they ask you that question, respond not from your history, but from your imagination. Thank you so much.